This is Pantdora, my 1,000-gallon cloud rainforest vivarium, a tropical ecosystem within glass. Its purpose is to observe and study the workings of a wild ecosystem, all the biological changes in creatures, landscape, and story over time. We've seen animals rise to dominance in the food chain and eventually fall away. This here, for instance, was the body of Lady Deathstrike, a fallen giant huntsman spider who birthed 2 massive egg sacs full of baby huntsman spiders, who now frolic Pantdora, and her sudden death saddened all of us who followed her incredible life story. But no story is complete without its set of unexpected turn of events. And what I stumbled upon as I was checking the back of the rock wall was a plot twist I didn't have on my bingo card. In the night, a peculiar set of legs caught my eye. What? No way! But how was this possible? Lady Deathstrike? What in the Mandela effect is going on? She had died, and we all mourned her passing. Well, turns out, uncovering the truth of the mystery of this resurrected huntsman spider was a story that would blow my mind forever.
Viva Lady Death! Strike!
Please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon. Welcome to the AC fam. Enjoy. Wait, how was this possible? I had to backtrack and cover all possible explanations as to how this giant huntsman, our Lady Deathstrike, was alive. Or was this even Lady Deathstrike? I'll tell you what I think happened here, as well as address what some of your theories were. But first, let's go over the history real quick. Lady Deathstrike was an adult huntsman spider whom I mated with a male huntsman who later birthed an egg sac that she protected for several weeks until it hatched. Then I released her babies first, then eventually allowed her to come out on her own. Then, that day, I discovered the whole open door disaster, where I left the door of my ant room open and my dog came in and opened the doors, which were only held together at the time by magnets. And in a panic, I had to take total inventory of the animals within the vivarium. Luckily, only one frog, Kermit, got out and actually showed up to be let in, while Lady Deathstrike was nowhere to be found for days, which to me meant she was in my home. Then, by some miracle, I found her one morning, caught her, and placed her back into the vivarium, where she went on to lay another egg sac, and then eventually die. Or did she? After the Great Escape episode, some of you began posting your crazy theories. It's gonna be crazy if Lady Deathstrike never left the vivarium, and he just found a random huntsman spider in his house that happened to be pregnant. There were a flood of comments like this, suggesting that the real Lady Deathstrike had been hiding somewhere in Pantdora the whole time, and the one that died was simply some other random pregnant adult huntsman from my home. But I dismissed these theories because I knew deep inside that the spider I had caught was the Lady Deathstrike, because huntsman spiders are not so common in my home. I usually spot them about once a year in my place, if ever. So odds were the huntsman I had caught was an escaped Lady Deathstrike, and she eventually died after giving birth to her second egg sac. Or did she? I watched as she feasted on a roach she had caught over the waters. She looked good, healthy, and unbothered. I couldn't help but imagine for a second that the AC family theories were actually correct, and that this was the real Lady Deathstrike. But guys, as crazy of a story as that is, I'm inclined to still say no. This is not our Lady Deathstrike, as much as I wish it was. There was still one other possibility as to who this mysterious huntsman spider was. And I'll tell you whom I think it is in a second. But I want you guys to give me your opinions as to the identity of this huntsman. Is this Lady Deathstrike or someone else? I'll give you some time to leave your guesses in the comments, because when I actually discovered the truth about this spider's identity later in this video. It was definitely a plot twist I didn't see coming. By morning, our King Golden Dragon Smog, the resident male sunskink, emerged to greet the fresh morning air. He stepped out of his shadowy den with pride and great handsomeness. But there was just one problem about this day. He was no longer free to enjoy his kingdom, which he now had to get used to sharing, for a new queen was currently basking in his favorite rock throne. Under the sunning lamps, enjoying the heat, was Daenerys, the new sunskink female, who was just introduced into Pantdora. Daenerys loved basking in this new sunning spot up on the rock wall. It had a great view, a refreshing mist from the waterfall, and was directly under the UV and heat lamps, both of which these sunskinks need to be healthy. Daenerys had tried basking in every other place in the rainforest, but this was by far the best. She looked down at Smog, who refused to join her. Daenerys, unfazed, suddenly turned around so she could reposition herself to expose the other side of her body to the UV and the lower half to the heat. She was really loving this throne and settling in nicely into Pantdora. When she was properly heated up, she descended down into the lowlands to begin her daily hunt. She sniffed around the foliage with her tongue. I loved watching her hunt. It was like watching a meat-eating dinosaur searching for food. As she got to the driftwood, Smog was gone. I don't understand why he was so shy of her. Regardless, she continued on with her search for food, which she could smell was all around. It was just a matter of locating where the insects were hiding. She inspected under the leaf litter and searched every possible shadowy place, pit, nook, and cranny. She eventually climbed the driftwood and paused for a moment to take a break. Smog was back hanging out on his platform as Daenerys moved on into the thick moss to continue on with her search for prey. I hoped these two lizards would come face to face soon, and little did I know, these two lizards would soon surprise me. Now, as thorough as Daenerys was, when hunting, there were several ways in which Mother Nature had given certain prey creatures the skills to evade such predators and survive in a rainforest full of predators wanting to eat them. A movement in the soil caught my eye, in an area that Daenerys had previously snooped around. Do you see it? It's something that would have made a tasty morsel for a sunskink had it been discovered, but thankfully, the creature had the perfect disguise. I spotted a long wormy head poke out and drag a peculiar flat piece with it. That was when I knew exactly what it was. A bagworm used its great strength to pull its huge home, made from debris it had collected from the forest floor along with it. With this flat home, the bagworm could be safely protected from ants and other predators that might make a meal out of it. It must have hatched from an egg and grew up in Pantdora, completely under my radar, which is crazy because it blows my mind that I'm still discovering new and random creatures in Pantdora several months in. This is the larval stage of a species of moth, but while it's still a caterpillar, it crawls around looking for food, namely plant matter, and sticks debris together using silk to form its protective home as it grows. It looks like this bagworm has collected quite an interesting array of specks and grains of randomness that creates such an attractive artwork piece, wouldn't you say? This bagworm is an artiste and also a skilled architect, Because look, as soon as it sensed my camera, it shot inside and emerged through a secret back door and began to move in the opposite direction. How cool! I wondered if any of the constituents of the home were organic, and if so, what it did to ensure it didn't mold or attract detritivores who might want to feed on it. If I were to guess, much of this bagworm's home was made from pieces of exoskeleton, from dead insects, tiny bits of sand, bark, and dirt. But that's just my guess. How about you guys? For those prey insects that lacked such ingenious building skills as the bagworm, nature had equipped them with strong armored bodies to protect them from predation. Like this snail. I watched it slide along the forest floor, worry-free. I don't think the sunskinks bother them, due to their shells. I also spotted this random beetle. Not sure of its species, but it's my first time to see it. Beetles with their tough shells are often ignored by predators due to their indigestibility. Rocksteady, our resident rhino beetle, who recently reached the end of his life, was completely left alone by predators when he was alive. I missed him so much. But don't worry, AC family, I have a plan for an upcoming episode. So stay tuned and make sure you're subscribed. But for the soft-bodied insects, there were actually many places in the rainforest that were supreme hiding spots that, once found, offered a perfect refuge from the predators. Behind the moss wall was a roach, but not just any roach. This giant was an OG, introduced into the rainforest since the first Gaia event when I populated the lands with creatures. It's a Madagascar hissing cockroach, which has to this day managed to evade predation and my camera by spending most of its time behind the moss wall, only emerging into the open at night to feed. Below some dried moss, I spotted another roach, a lat roach, in deep rest. It also was safe from predators here and would be emerging in the night to look for food. I also spotted another lat roach that had just shed its skin and was safe tanning in its darkened burrow below ground. But speaking of molting, this perfectly segues into another theory some of you guys proposed regarding our mysterious Huntsman. Plot twist of plot twists, that was just Lady Deathstrike's shed the whole time. The fact that her body disappeared sometime afterwards could have supported this theory. But as cool as that theory is, I'm afraid it is not true. When a huntsman sheds its skin, the exoskeleton left behind is translucent and whitish. There was no such empty skeleton anywhere. Sadly, the dead huntsman we found was indeed dead, and I believe one of our dragons ate her remains. There was still another possibility, and I would soon find an important clue that would help point me to the truth about the mystery huntsman spider later that night. But guys, there's something new about Pantdora that I have to talk about. The rainforest that used to smell like fresh plants and humidity now stinks. Behold, the official bathroom of the sunskinks. Our golden dragons have chosen this rock shelf over the pond as their official toilet. And the lizards have decided to leave their huge piles of dung all over the place here. Some creatures, like this millipede, feast on their poop, and some of the poop actually ends up rolling onto the moss floor, where it gets eaten up by the abundance of soil creatures, like springtails and mites. Now guys, check out how beautiful this cycling of nutrients is. The little edible bits from the lizard poop get eaten up by the soil creatures, who then themselves poop, which happens to be extremely nutrient-rich for the plants of the forest floor. Along with the earthworm casts that create even more fertilizer for the plants, the rainforest's plant life has been thriving. Now all you plant lovers, let's nerd out together now, shall we? Here are some of my favorite ground cover plants. Check out this pink syngonium, our lemon-lime philodendron, and golden pothos. The plants are totally loving all the nutrient-rich soils resulting from the Pandoran creatures pooping in it. But the cycle of nutrients don't end there. There's more. The vines, who also set their roots down into the soils, are thriving. And as I looked closer into this vine leaf collection, I noticed some acrobat ants, preoccupied. These are the chromatoblasters. And this chromatoblaster was searching for something. It was looking for an ant cow that was ready to be milked. These healthy vine leaves were actually green pastures for the ants' cattle, the mealybugs, who were feeding from the plant's nutritious sap. This ant had found a mealybug that was ready to be milked. It strokes the mealybug, which causes the mealybug to poop out a sweet byproduct called honeydew, which is a valuable food source for the ants. It's just amazing to me how nutrients travel from lizard to soil creatures, to the plants, to the mealybugs, and to the ants. And this is only one nutrient pathway. There are actually multiple pathways that nutrients travel through an ecosystem. The food web is truly a marvel of Mother Nature. And that was when I spotted some other ants making use of the chromatoblasters' leftovers. Members of the Dark Horde, invasive black crazy ants, were also busy harvesting any drops of honeydew they could find from the surfaces of plants that were squirted out by the mealybugs. Though I did a good job at eradicating most of their numbers in the past, I knew it was only a matter of time before they would bounce back. Black crazy ants are some of the world's most concerning and successful invaders, for a reason. I didn't know where they were nesting, but I was surely keeping an eye on them. Another invasive ant, ghost ants, were still sending in workers from outside the vivarium into Pantdora, stealing mealybugs, which was okay, so long as the ants didn't decide to invade the vivarium. Other ants I saw in Pantdora were the gnome ants, which did a good job of cleaning up the forest floor of dead insects. I still don't know their exact species, but they look like a smaller fire ant to me. But as I watched the gnome ants going about their work, I felt sad seeing the entrance to what was once the home of our resident marauder ants, the Terra Raiders. It had been weeks since I'd seen them, and last I saw, they had been infected with mites. The Terra Raiders had either been completely eradicated by the mites, or were simply hiding away underground due to the rising temperatures of my area. What saddened me about this whole situation, though, was that I now suspect it was the former, and that the Terra Raiders had truly been wiped out, because there was another neighboring marauder ant colony nearby that were not hibernating from the heat. The Leviathans, my massive marauder ant colony on their sea dragon ant farm, were out in full force, collecting their daily superworms. Majors and even super majors were on site, ready to battle any outside creature that might decide to steal their booty. The chopped up superworms, still capable of movement, tried to crawl away to no avail. They were now food for the colony, which was healthy, strong, and hungry. I watched wide-eyed every time the Leviathans fed. The sight of the ants rushing in to drag the superworms back to their lair is nothing short of awesome. Have a look. This footage is not time-lapsed. This is in real time. There is no messing with a full-grown, hungry colony like the Leviathans, who are doing so well. But as you can see, these marauders haven't decided to hibernate, despite temperatures soaring, which makes me think our Terra Raiders might actually be gone for good. Inside, I hope not, but we would just have to see come the start of rainy season next month, when temperatures cool off a bit where I live. Meanwhile, I've scheduled a cooling event this week, and temperatures are much cooler now in Pantdora than they are outside my home. Let's hope the Terra Raiders bounce back. But speaking about other members of the ant room that a lot of you have been asking about, our Crimson Knights, the fire ants, are doing well and also eat a lot. They of course love the heat. I'm hoping they don't have a nuptial flight in my ant room this year, as that would be really bad. And I don't have a plan for containing them. I also have another great update. Sugar, my rescued sugar glider, with his little nub of a foot, was awaiting his superworm treat, which I give him every evening. He munched on it happily like candy. But as some of you already know, he also has a companion. See her head? Honey, his wife, poked her head out, ready to accept her superworm treat. She crawled out of her pouch slowly. She is a special color phase known as a white face. She smelled Suga's superworm. Then happily took hers. Now these two marsupials have been trying to have a family for the longest time. And AC family, I have the coolest update on their status. Let me give Honey another superworm and grab their pouch. Behold, a baby sugar glider. Isn't it cute? I've named it Gizmo. Hi there, Gizmo. Sorry to wake you. Gizmo is a white face, just like Mom. But that's not all. On the other corner of the pouch, is another little rascal, also a white face. I call him Ewok. Coochie coochie coo. Now these sugar gliders are very interesting marsupials, which means, like kangaroos and koalas, babies are born as little naked pink gummy bear type thingies, which crawl into the mom's pouch, which you can see is that gaping hole, and develop further in there until they eventually emerge from the pouch. The babies have emerged and can no longer fit inside the pouch, but they still feed from their mom's milk, from her nipples which are inside the pouch. But soon Gizmo and Ewok will be out feeding on what their parents eat, which by the way is not an easy diet to prepare in captivity. So if you get a sugar glider, make sure to do your research, as they are not the ideal pet for everyone and are a 15-year commitment. But as I watched the sugar gliders crawl back into their pouch to sleep some more before their nightly emergence, I was grateful that the gliders had finally achieved their family goals. Night fell in Pantdora, and the nocturnal mists covered the forest. All 5 of our tree frogs were out on their nightly hunt. On this night, there seemed to be an abundance of roaches on the prowl, particularly the lat roaches. They were out to play and search for edibles in the forest. This roach munched on some decaying vine. Others wandered deep into tunnels within the moss. Also present were the various isopods, which to me looked like alien specters, foraging for decaying material to munch on. These terrestrial crustaceans, as well as the roaches, were important for our ecosystem, as they helped break down vegetable and decaying matter to release those nutrients our plants love into the soils. But also behind the moss wall, our mystery huntsman had emerged once again, and it was then that I made a very interesting discovery. Skin. Our mystery huntsman had shed her skin. So this was an important clue regarding her identity. Let me explain. During the initial Gaia event, I also added in a tiny huntsman spider whom I would see every now and then, and last I saw, she was this big. The fact that this spider shed, to me, meant that she was most likely that small huntsman that had officially reached her adult size. Not to say that adult huntsmen don't shed, but they certainly don't shed often as adults. Also, looking at her size, she was just slightly smaller than Our Lady Deathstrike. So, in conclusion, this mystery huntsman was not Lady Deathstrike resurrected, but rather the young huntsman we placed into Pantdora months ago, who is now an adult. Mystery solved. Or so I thought. The next day, I looked into Aqua Noctis, our Blackwater Pond. It was still nicely tinted, with nutritious tannins, and full of fish. There were also plenty of snails. Sadly, the last of our crabs had died away after months of living here, and I don't think they were able to breed, as their species likely needed brackish water to do so. I was pleased to see that the plants and moss was thriving, and that the waters were still crystal clean and algae free. The system was perfectly balanced. Even the surface of the pond was free from biofilm and perfectly clear. Sadly, most of the floating plants were eaten by the snails. Now, I was concerned that the guppies were constantly having to inbreed, and that soon we'd be seeing some deformities due to the limited gene pool. So, I resolved to diversify the genetics and visit the largest vivarium I own. Oh? You thought Pantdora was the only one? Nope. Welcome to my giant home aviary, full of birds, creatures, and abundant plant life. At the center, I have a neat waterfall and pond, and within it live some snails and guppies. I scooped them up. I also collected some floating plants. And placed their container into Aqua Noctis to acclimate, then release them into our Blackwaters. So satisfying seeing them explore their new home. With these new genes, the deformities and inbreeding should not be a problem for the next few months. I watched as the guppies began to feast, like a school of piranhas, on a newly shed roach that must have slipped into the pond. Now that the system has been stable, I've been trying to think of other creatures to add to Aqua Noctis. Any suggestions, guys? In terms of the floating plants, to keep them away from the snails, I decided to plant them up high on the rock wall, where they could still benefit from filtering the water of nitrates. They looked pretty there, wouldn't you say? And looking up, I spotted something that truly warmed my heart. At first I thought it was one sunskink, but eventually realized I was looking at two heads at the basking site. Both our sunskinks were basking now at the same place. At first I thought Smog was hogging the heat lamp, all to himself, and Daenerys was totally scared. But as the lizards began to move, the interaction surprised me. Smog puffed up, asserting his dominance. Daenerys responded with submissive body language. And then to my surprise, instead of aggression, Smog moved aside, signaling to Daenerys that it was her turn to bask on the hot side, while Smog situated beneath the UV lamp side. Aw, how cute. Our sunskinks were officially a pair. I was happy to see our dragons getting along well. It seemed the rainforest as a whole is still on its signature winding journey of change. And though some of these changes are sad to us human observers, for Mother Nature, it's all part of her process, which I believe is inherently good. The rainforest as a whole is still thriving, and I mean, look at it, with lush plant life and new life springing forth from the soils, revealing more and more of the forest's secrets at every turn. There was still so much to look forward to in Pantdora, like whether or not this mantis egg sac will hatch, or whether the Terra Raiders will make a return come rainy season, hopefully before the Dark Horde does. I've been thinking of scheduling another Gaia event come rainy season, this time with certain rainforest creatures that I had in mind that were still missing from our ecosystem. as well as throwing in some queen ants I managed to find during the nuptial flight season coming up. And as for our mystery huntsman spider, no longer a mystery. As I closed the side door to the vivarium, I noticed the huntsman spider hiding in the talangia. She was so pretty. I felt she made a worthy replacement of our late Lady Deathstrike. Whoa, 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 whoa. Wait. What is that? No way! You were right!